Thank you. I'm Rajesh. I'm a cardiologist at Stanford and here to talk about HealthPals, real-world evidence-based care. Introduce our team with unique strengths in medicine, AI, and real-world evidence. Sushant Shankar is my co-founder. He's our data scientist. We're lucky to have Yuli as a medical AI expert, and Bob Harrington is the president of the American Heart Association on our advisory board. We also are partners with Veradigm and ACC and have the largest ambulatory EHR patient record data set in the world, as well as the largest linked claims EHR data set. So when you think about medical AI, most of the very advanced technology is up at the top end of this fruit tree. They're very sexy in terms of what they're able to produce. And what I'm going to talk to you today about, I think, is low-hanging fruit. It doesn't make it any easier to build, but it could have a massive impact. Preventing cardiometabolic disease is incredibly sexy for preventive cardiologists. 18 million people die every year in this country from cardiovascular diseases, and 80% of these are preventable. And yet we do a terrible job of this. 50% of our preventive care decisions are not evidence-based. Introducing CLINT, which is HealthPals' clinical intelligence platform for combining data, guidelines, and AI. Again, the largest real-world evidence data set, we have codified all of the medical guidelines for preventing cardiometabolic disease and other disease states. And it's customizable to your own quality protocols and AI optimized for the best treatment pathways, making this incredibly valuable for both pharma and technology companies, as well as payers and now providers and large health systems. What does it do? Imagine across a population you can identify every patient eligible for guideline-driven medical therapy instantly at any point during their care and their care pathway. Here's one patient's profile where you can see that she can't change her ethnicity or her family history, but you can see the relative impacts of lowering her cholesterol and systolic blood pressure compared to her BMI reduction on her overall risk reduction, giving you a rank order of impactful interventions. Scaling this to an entire population, you can identify entire care gaps. So for instance, of patients who meet criteria to be on anticoagulation, how many are actually on it? And then drill down back to the point of care to make that intervention. You can do this in a geographically mapped way and project the impact on risk reduction across a variety of different disease states simultaneously because they never occur in isolation. We're doing this across the US at a ZIP3 level for SGLT2 inhibitors. You're seeing that here, but you can do that in any country, and we are currently deploying in Australia and in the Southeast Asia countries. We're also defining the patient journey. Longitudinal real-world data allows you to do that, where you can take a healthy state for patients and find out who developed and in what time frame disease 1 and then disease 2 in sequence, and what medical decisions were made along the way. How did they get there? Who will get there next? And when? We're answering the critical questions for real-world practice. What is the best second-line diabetes drug? What is the best oral anticoagulant for your AFib patient? How many of your patients are not treated adequately for their hypertension? And what's the best drug to work for each of those patients? These responder and non-responder signatures are critical to personalizing care. By optimizing treatments within the guardrails of evidence, we actually produce actionable insights using machine learning that are immediately deployable at the point of care. And because of that, for R&D purposes for pharma, we are currently helping pharma companies with randomized controlled trial design, synthetic control groups, drug repurposing, and non-genomic signatures of responders, non-responders, as shown in these clusters of diabetic medication non-responders. We have about 1.7 billion patient life years of longitudinal EHR data. We have excellent data partnerships, excellent clinical partnerships both in the US and abroad, and international health systems such as Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia and NHS. And we've recently signed deals with top 5 tech company, top 5 pharma companies, and soon a top 5 payer. Globally, we are working with single-payer health systems in the following countries, working to reduce the incidence of chronic disease burden within those populations at a significant savings to those governments. So HealthPals is focusing on the low-hanging fruit in order to have the largest impact globally. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a perfect presentation. Judges, some questions, please. Do you have any data on the efficacy so far? And also, can you tell us a little bit about the customer acquisition channels?
Yeah, so we did we've done 2 clinical trials, one at Stanford showing that we were able to modify physician decision-making approximately 30% of the time, producing a 40% risk reduction over a 3-month period, around over 100 patient decisions. We're about to publish a study with the ACC that was done on 18 million patients in their Pinnacle registry, showing that decision-making for oral anticoagulation or AFib, there's about a 32% care gap across the country in that. And so the data, the evidence of our efficacy is in the analysis and the peer review process that we're publishing these papers in. In terms of customer acquisition, we have a very strong network through the ACC, a data partnership with virtually every major pharma company, which is already purchasing data. They no longer want just the data, the real-world data. They want the insights on top of the data. So we are the analytics engine for Veradigm and for ACC.
Can you talk a little bit more about your customers? So you mentioned pharma companies, single-payer systems. Can you just break that down a bit?
Yeah, so life science companies in general are interested in understanding how their drugs are being used in which markets. And for instance, in the US, their medical science liaisons regionally would like to know where their drug is second, third, or fourth, or first in that market for that particular indication. We can show them not only where their drug is performing, but where their competitors are performing, and the profiles of the patients that are being given their drugs versus not, as well as the profiles of the clinics that are administering those meds or not. So they're very interested in that, as well as predictive algorithms to say where the next generation of eligible patients for their drugs are going to come from. That's commercial. On the R&D side, they're extremely interested in responder, non-responder signatures to plan their phase 3 clinical trials. Currently, cardiovascular drugs cost about $1.1 billion to bring to market on a phase 3, which is not sustainable. So we can help them reduce their study size by helping them optimize the cohorts with inclusion and exclusion criteria.
Is that your main customer?
That's our main customer right now. Payers, it's about defining the optimal care pathways, improving upon their own existing guidance as to what will work and what will not work for those individual cohorts, and personalizing the payer pathways for those patients. And for health systems, we're actually working with ACC on a bi-directional feedback. We're choosing health systems that will allow us to give insights back to their data, and Veradigm, with Allscripts as a parent company, will help us push that data to the point of care to actually impact in an evidence-based way.
Thank you. Nice presentation. I'm curious to learn more about how you've acquired that amount of data, and especially looking at international partners, because it looks like it's not just de-identified if you're going to go back and give individualized recommendations. So could you explain a little bit more how you've gotten access to the data? It seems like EHR, but you mentioned real-world evidence, so are you also collecting consumer wearable type data?
So great question. So the data that I showed you today is through a partnership with Veradigm. Veradigm is a subsidiary of Allscripts. Veradigm purchased Practice Fusion and partnered with NextGen to accumulate the largest outpatient EHR data set. Now, all the data we see is completely de-identified. When we work with a industry partner, the most granular data they can see is what I showed you, which was ZIP3. They can't get lower than ZIP3 in terms of identifiable information. For health systems, we can give that coded information back to a health system, and they can re-identify on their end and push down. So that's how they would affect point of care change. Second part of your question?
Are you really getting real-world evidence, or is it coming from EHR?
So depending on the health system or the country of origin, some of them, for instance, in Singapore, every patient's getting a Fitbit. So that information actually is feeding into an EMR system that we're in discussions with their government about how we could better inform compliance or progress on a current disease condition. But for the most part, it's EHR data that we're using.
Very nice presentation. Who's your most relevant nearest competitor, and how defensible is your IP that drives all the algorithms and analytics?
So I think I have a competitor slide. Sorry. So you think there's two types of competitors. There's you have the medical repositories of curated expert information. Many of you use these tools every day. The problem is that they're not automated or personalized to the patient you're seeing at that moment, whereas ours is. So this is evidence-based, but not necessarily for your population. And then there's, of course, the EHR companies, which are in varying stages of building population health insights. And I think that Optum probably has the best population health platform. But again, they have no interest in going to the point of care, and we haven't seen that movement. And they don't really have the right team around them, but they are a potential competitor of ours. The most analogous company is Flatiron. Flatiron did this with clinical trial data in the oncology space. They did not use guidelines, but they used the raw data from the clinical trials and their own EHR data to map patients into those pathways. But at the moment, at our level of data, we're not seeing a direct competitor for what we're doing. And I'm forgetting your second question. Okay. The IP. So, so we've filed 3 patents on the algorithms that we're developing using evidence-based guidelines applied to population health and optimizing those guidelines using ML. So that is one space, but it is a very crowded space in terms of data acquisition and real-world analytics. So we're trying to move as quickly as we can in terms of market share.
Hey, Raj, real quickly, because we got to move on. Can you talk very briefly about your business model, total addressable market, and exit strategy? But really quickly.
Yeah. So the business model is to expand in the life science market initially, but really hit payers and pharma this year pretty hard,
Is it
and then
subscription as a
single payer.
service? Is subscription as a service?
Actually, yes. So
Okay,
subscription
that's
as a
good.
service is the
Okay.
model. But internationally, these are 5-year deployments to reduce chronic disease burden, with deal sizes ranging from $50 to $150 million each. So exit strategy is looking for acquisition perhaps in the next 2 to 3 years versus IPO.
Cool.
So.
Okay. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you, everybody.